In 1997, Ford released the Expedition model, and it was meant to be a direct competitor to the GMC Yukon and to the Chevrolet Tahoe. Now, what ensued was a 10-year battle between the two largest US automakers, I believe, and it was an era where SUV ownership was at an all-time high, but it all came crumbling down when the recession hit and when another thing hit an all-time high, which was gas prices. What we're sitting in today is the 4th generation Expedition, and I'm really excited to see how this particular vehicle competes in a market where now SUVs are more popular and more fuel efficient than ever before. So let's see how the Expedition stacks up. The Ford Expedition starts life at $50,000 in a base trim. This is a limited trim, which is the middle of 5 optional trims, and it starts life at just over $61,000 and is $67,000 as equipped. Much of that optional cost stems from a nearly $3,000 all-wheel drive system that this particular car does have. Now, opting for the Max, the longer wheelbase, helps the truck grow nearly 12 inches, and it's really useful for those who intend to use the third row often because you gain an actual trunk space behind the trunk. Now, this actually does have a slight trunk behind the third row when the third row is up, but it's just not comparable to that extra 12 inches you're going to get when you get the Max. All Expeditions come with a key code thing over here on the B-pillar. I'm a little bit sussed out by it personally, but I also think it's a very convenient feature for those who intend to maybe do keyless activities like surfing and don't want to bring their car keys with them or have to hide them somewhere on the beach, for instance. Now, standard on all Expeditions is a 3.5 liter EcoBoost, which is a twin turbo V6 motor producing 375 horsepower and 470 pound-feet of torque. Although the top line Platinum trim gets a slightly different tune, which gives it 400 horsepower and 480 pound-feet of torque. Power is sent to all 4 wheels in this car through a 10-speed automatic transmission, which also is standard. And this truck weighs a hefty 5,700 pounds, which is about the same as an Audi e-tron. Now let's get this truck back on the road, see how it drives. So setting off here in the Expedition, I'm currently actually in normal driving mode. This does have some drive modes like sport. I like to keep it in normal. This is obviously a large SUV and there's no reason to put it into any sort of sport mode. It doesn't do much in my opinion besides make the throttle a bit more sensitive. There's no need for that. Now, there's no denying the sheer size of this truck. You definitely feel like you're sitting really high up because you are, and you feel a good amount of size around you, but it actually drives pretty good for a body-on-frame truck. And I think that's largely due to the independent rear suspension that this truck gets. The GM counterparts all get live rear axles, so that helps us handle and drive a little bit more like a luxury SUV than a real body-on-frame truck, which is what it is. And the truck seems to be damped very nicely as it soaks up any sort of bumps and makes me feel as though it would be a pretty comfy ride even over some rough terrain. Now, speaking of the competition, I think that this Expedition competes primarily with the GMC Yukon, the Chevrolet Suburban, and Tahoe. It also competes with the Nissan Armada, the Toyota Sequoia, and I actually think that's the main competition. The very high-end trims of this, the Platinum trim, they do compete a little bit with the Cadillac Escalade and with the Infiniti QX80. The driving experience is pretty solid for a truck of this size, and the seating position is really, really good. I do wish that the seat backs had a bit more cushion than they do, but nonetheless, the overall position that I'm sitting in right now and the steering wheel all feel really nice. What I don't love is that this car requires a lot of steering input in order to turn, so I'll find myself making basic left and right hand turns and almost turning the steering wheel a full 180 degrees. So I don't love that, and it becomes and starts to feel a bit cumbersome. Now, visibility is pretty good. Obviously, you have a really large greenhouse and you have really large side mirrors. What I don't love is that you don't get a ton of visibility out of the rear window and out of this, or through this central or interior rear view mirror. Of course, the real strength of trucks like this is the usability. You can throw a ton of stuff and a ton of people in this fairly easily and fairly comfortably. You can tow about 9,200 pounds, I believe, and generally speaking, the cabin is not only very nicely finished, if you will, the build quality is decent, the material use is pretty good. I really like how the dash has been constructed, and the general styling is pretty good. Second row leg room and space is fantastic. I think shoulder width is pretty solid too. I could easily imagine 3 of me sitting comfortably across, having enough leg room. The third row, believe it or not, well, I guess you'd come to expect in trucks of this size, is decently sized. You can fit, or I can fit at about 6'2" back there. I wouldn't want to be there for a long journey per se, but definitely under around 5'9", 5'10", you could more than comfortably fit back there. Yes, the seats are vinyl instead of leather and not quite as comfortable, but very serviceable, especially as compared to cars in that mid to full-size regular SUV that don't really offer you that same space back in the third row. Legroom being the biggest factor, you do get a solid amount of legroom. You can bring the second row forward as well to give yourself more legroom in the third row. Now, even with this regular wheelbase, you can still fit some stuff behind the third row if you have it up, but with it down, you have a massive trunk. And if you bring the second row down, you have a huge flat cargo space to put anything from bikes to huge boxes and furniture. So you can really fit a bunch of stuff in this truck that you could usually not fit in your typical SUV, say a Range Rover. Now, this truck boasts 15 cup holders. And if you know me, you know that makes me a little bit excited because I think about how many Tallboys this may be able to fit, especially considering that the Suburban I reviewed is the current record holder with 31 Tallboys. So I'm excited to see if this can either keep up or even beat the Suburban. If you guys want to guess how many Tallboys you think this can fit, I'm all for it. So without further ado, here's the Tallboy test. So as I already mentioned, the Expedition feels and looks very nice on the inside. Now, the limited trim itself offers you certain advantages over a base vehicle. For instance, you get 20-inch wheels that look decent, as well as a lot of sidewall, so plenty of rubber to soak up some bumps and protect your wheels. You also get automatic deploying running boards that come down when you open the door and they go back up when you close the door. I personally don't really need a running board to get into an SUV of this height, not to be bragging or anything, but it is a really nice feature. I know for people who don't want those nasty running boards always sticking down, ruining the side profile design of the car, it gives you the option to, store them away as you drive, or if you don't even, probably turn them off if you don't want them to come down at all. For me, I end up usually skipping them on the way down, sometimes on the way up. I use it to boost myself up, I can't lie, but it's a really nice feature. You get a hands-free lift gate where you can kick below the rear bumper and it will open the liftgate on its own if your hands are full. Just like many other SUVs of this size, you can also just open the rear glass itself. You get LED tail lamps that look a smidge better and are a bit brighter. You get power folding side view mirrors. You get push button start, and you get front collision sensing. Not to mention memory function for the driver's seat, heated and cooled front row seats, first and second row seats with leather trimming, as I already mentioned, and a heated steering wheel for those cold winters. Rounding out the limited trim is a 12-speaker Bang & Olufsen speaker system and a wireless charging pad here in the center console. Now, all Expeditions come standard with this coin holder up here, which I guess is useful for parking meters. So you see, this truck does offer you some of the luxury and amenities you'd otherwise find in a $20,000 more expensive Escalade. Now, I'm not going to say that a Navigator or an Escalade have less amenities or less luxury than this car, because they certainly do have more. I'm just not sure if it's worth the price discrepancy. If I needed pure luxury, I'd be considering maybe a Range Rover, a BMW X7, a Mercedes GLS. Obviously, the cost there being slightly in the sense of size, but far more luxurious, far more comfy, and they're not obviously body-on-frame trucks, so they're going to handle and drive a little better than these trucks are. Again, the cost is, the size, and let's say durability. Now, I've yet to drive the brand new generation Yukon, Tahoe, Escalade, any of them. I've only sat in them in a dealer briefly. But I have driven all versions of the previous gen, and this seems to drive better. Now, I think part of it is that independent rear suspension. I think another part of it is, despite the ridiculous steering input needed, that the steering itself feels a bit more direct and a little bit easier to drive, more like a smaller SUV than a massive truck. But I think the most major reason is the motor. This truck's V6, twin turbo V6 of course, actually produces about the exact same numbers as the upgraded 6.2 liter V8 that's found, I believe, standard in the Escalade and optional in the Yukon and the Tahoe. That base 5.3 feels completely lethargic next to this motor, and I think that the power plant, which is standard, only one motor available, that different tune available on the Platinum vehicle, or Platinum trim, helps this feel and drive a good bit better than the Suburban, Tahoe, Yukon, Yukon XL, Escalade, Escalade ESV do. Now, honestly, I prefer the styling of the GM products, and I even prefer their brand image, especially the Escalade. But I don't know if any of that's worth the extra money, especially because this balances luxury, size, practicality, and cost very well. In fact, some of these 2020s, even the Platinum trim, top-of-the-line Platinum trim, 2020s can be found somewhere in the low 60s, brand new still. And I think that makes them even more appealing when you compare them to the GMCs and the Chevrolets. You can get the top-of-the-line Platinum trim, which offers you nicer headlights, nicer leather, some more tech such as cameras and stuff, a pano sunroof, just to name a few features, all for about $60,000. Sidebar, these look pretty sweet with some knobby tires and a slight lift. I was not only pleasantly surprised by this truck, but I actually like it more than the previous gen GM products, which I was not anticipating, considering this technically is previous gen, even though they're still making it. Now I just got to compare it to the brand new Tahoe and Yukon. If you guys enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. New videos are coming out every single week. As always, this is Rio. Peace.